The massive oak doors of the chapel were closed. Behind them, over 200 people waited, half of them Navy SEALs and high-ranking officers in immaculate dress uniforms. The rest, civilians, who were about to witness something they hadn't been invited to see. I stood in the hushed, cavernous hallway, staring at my encrypted phone. 3 minutes ago, a text had pinged through. Valerie. Seraphina, you're really wearing that to your wedding? Cute! Do they let you salute the cake too? No congrats, no good luck. Just corrosive sarcasm on the day I was supposed to marry the best man I'd ever known. Classic Valerie. I slid the phone into the deep pocket of my white uniform tunic without responding. There was nothing left to say to her. This was actually tame by her standards. I'd expected worse. I adjusted the cuffs of my pristine uniform. The 4 stars on my shoulder felt heavier than usual. I wasn't walking into a high-stakes briefing or a base lockdown. I was walking down an aisle. To my left and right stood 2 men who pulled me out of disaster, Chief Petty Officer Ramos and Lieutenant Commander Hill. They weren't groomsmen. They were security. They simply said, "Ma'am, we're walking you in. No arguments." Hill had 2 prosthetic fingers from a training accident, but he could still outshoot most of the men on base. Ramos had once stood a 3-day watch over a failing logistics hub with a broken ankle, keeping every shipment on schedule. They flanked me like a combat team, because in a way, this was the final battlefield, the internal one. Miles, my fiancé, was inside. He was calm. He was an academic intelligence analyst, quiet, brilliant, and steady. He was the only civilian who truly understood me. He never once asked me to wear a dress. He just said, "Wear what feels honest." So I did. The ceremony was meant to be small, but I hadn't sent 200 invitations. My unit, my entire career just showed up. No RSVP, no fanfare, just silent, respectful arrivals in polished boots and dark vehicles. One of my captains, a man I'd promoted from corporal, had nodded at me earlier and said, "You taught us how to lead. We're not letting you walk down this path alone." I don't cry easily, but that one hit different. It's strange standing still when you've led task forces and survived ambushes. This should have been easy. Walk, speak, marry, but it felt like the most exposed I'd ever been. I didn't tell Valerie I was wearing the uniform. I knew her reaction. She always thought I joined the military out of pure spite, a long, expensive detour from being a real woman who hosted political dinners. When I made commander, she said, "Cool, now you can finally focus on finding a good man." She never grasped that my ambition wasn't about proving it to her. It was about proving it to the fire. I smoothed the edge of my shoulder board. The stars were mine, earned through 2 decades of logistical precision, political minefields, and sheer bloody endurance. I wore them today not for battle, but for love. A voice in my earpiece, the base chaplain. "We're ready for you, Admiral." Ramos and Hill turned slightly. They didn't need to speak. My white leather heels clicked against the tile. The weight in my chest wasn't nerves. It was the cumulative silence of 20 years, amplified by a room full of men who had every reason to be anywhere else but came for me. I passed the threshold. The organ music swelled. The air was still for 1 perfect second. Then I heard it, a single, powerful voice cutting through the music. "Admiral, on deck!" I need to know I'm not the only one who's experienced this kind of calculated family betrayal. If you have ever felt like a black sheep in your own family, type betrayed in the comments below. And before we get into the heart-stopping action to come, please subscribe to the Revenge Dose channel and let us know where in the world you're watching from. Thank you for being here. Every single officer, sailor, and SEAL in uniform stood, snapping to attention with the sound of a single, unified machine. The first time I knew Valerie hated me wasn't over a fight. It was at age 7. I won a town-wide science fair, and she casually mentioned to our father that the science teacher was too nice to children with bad social skills. By high school, she was a master of silent sabotage. When I got my acceptance to the Naval Academy, she intercepted the official package, claiming she didn't think I'd actually go through with it, trying to do me a favor. It forced me to reapply and delay my entry. I learned the most important rule early. Respect doesn't always come from family. Sometimes you have to earn it somewhere else. I went to Annapolis. I learned how to move tons of high-value gear through chaotic war zones. I moved up the ranks, not through charm, but by making logistics seamless and unbreakable. While I was commanding task forces, Valerie was climbing the ladder as a high-profile, syndicated TV news anchor, all perfect lighting and synthetic sincerity. When I was stationed at Coronado, overseeing SEAL logistics support, she sent a lavish gift basket to my office, full of expensive wine and a note. "Stay strong, little sis. Hope the paperwork isn't too boring." I left the basket in the common area. But I continued to rise. I didn't just push paper. I revamped the entire mental fitness structure after a tragic suicide on base, establishing Operation Glasshouse, peer-led, mandatory check-ins. No cameras, no press, just real, raw conversation. It was a leader's job. And as I earned my stars one by one, Valerie kept using me. She ran a whole documentary segment about the woman who lead with silence, blurring my photo and never using my name, capitalizing on my career to boost her own credibility. She didn't want to tell my story. She wanted to tell her version of my story. I never corrected her. I learned that the loudest people aren't always the ones leading. They're just holding the mic. Real leadership happens in rooms with bad lighting and dented mugs. The last time I saw Valerie was 6 months ago. She was filming a segment on military spousal support and brought her entire camera crew to my base without permission. I refused the interview. She accused me of being a bitter, ungrateful filing cabinet. I calmly signed her trespass papers. She hadn't seen it coming. But today, she was here. I reached the altar and stood opposite Miles, who looked at me with pure, steady love. I watched as Valerie, seated in the second row, finally put the pieces together. The men in uniform weren't just guests. They were an entire command structure. The number of stars on my shoulder wasn't just a rank. It was a level of authority. Valerie's face, usually masked by a practiced anchoring smile, turned pale with dawning horror. She didn't whisper. She spoke in a sharp, stage whisper that was meant to travel. "Admiral? This is a joke, right? You're not actually an admiral. That's a costume." She stood up, drawing the attention away from Miles and the altar, forcing the hundreds of eyes onto her. The civilian side of the chapel gasped. The uniformed men remained perfectly still, but the air around them went cold. "Don't you dare lie on your wedding day, Seraphina. You're logistics. I saw your paperwork. You're a captain, maybe a commander. You don't
get 4 stars." She pointed a furious, accusatory finger at my shoulder. "You're not a 4-star Admiral. That is stolen valor, or worse, a PR stunt for your little mentorship garbage."
Valerie didn't understand the nuance. She thought I was only in logistics. What she didn't know was that 2 years ago, I had been quietly promoted to a non-combat strategic 4-star billet, one of the few in the Navy, specifically overseeing naval cyber defense and global logistics security. My rank was real, but it was rarely publicized. The tension was a physical pain. My own mother, seated next to Valerie, lowered her head, unwilling to choose a side. Then a voice cut in, not mine and not Miles. It was Lieutenant Commander Hill, standing rigid by the chapel door, his voice ringing with absolute, bone-jarring authority. "Valerie Day Brandon, that is Admiral Seraphina Vance, and you are speaking out of turn in a classified, authorized ceremony." He didn't just stop her. He called her by her full professional name, cutting her down with a single blast of military protocol. Valerie sputtered. "Classified ceremony? What is this, a mission?" Before anyone could answer, the rear door of the chapel opened and the single, stern-looking officer walked in. He was a 5-star general from the Pentagon, a man who oversaw my entire command structure and who had flown in specifically for the marriage. He ignored Valerie's hysterical outburst. He simply walked straight down the aisle and stood directly in front of me, Miles, and the chaplain. He gave me a deep, respectful salute, the highest form of respect in the armed forces, and addressed me using the ultimate honorific. "Admiral Vance," the 5-star general said, his voice quiet but carrying. "The President sends his personal congratulations. Now let's get you married, ma'am. We have a command briefing in the morning." The entire chapel, civilians and servicemen alike, was stunned into silence. Valerie stood frozen, utterly defeated, her professional career now officially compromised by her own jealousy. I smiled, not for triumph, but for the profound clarity of the moment. I looked at Miles, then back at the general. "Thank you, General. Permission to proceed with the ceremony?" "Granted, Admiral." As the ceremony resumed and the rest of the chapel sat down, Valerie slowly, shakily lowered herself back into her pew. She had spent 20 years trying to sabotage the truth. Today, the truth showed up in 4 stars and was saluted by a 5-star general. I had finally, completely left her shadow. If your story proves that your quiet dedication beats loud arrogance every time, I need you to type "victory" in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe to the Revenge Dose channel for more stories of ultimate vindication.